Coming up next on The Health Hustle.
The coaching I do is life optimization coaching. And I tell people all the time, like, what works for me might not work for you, but it's all one big experiment. Like, all we constantly do is find things that work for you and do more of that, and find what doesn't work for you and do less of that. Like, that is the simplest way you can improve your life. And having just almost like the balls to be like, like everyone in their mother is telling me I need to meditate, I need to read, I need to journal.
Sure.
I mean, dude, the amount of people here in this city in particular that are reliant on like a 3-hour morning routine before like getting into work, they'd be so much better off just like picking one of those things. It's not gospel that you need to do all of those things at the same time or before you jump into the first thing. Like, there's validity in, like, there's 6 non-negotiables when it comes to peak performance: gratitude, mindfulness practice, movement of some kind, hydration, sleep, and social interaction. And so with those 6, there's no that you need those 6 to like every day to really access peak performance. But no one's telling you to do all 6 of those before you hop into work, before you're trying to find flow.
Right.
Just find what works for you. If you find yourself more compelled to socialize at 5 p.m., awesome, go do it. You don't have to do it throughout the day. It's the problem, I think, with our space is people want to socialize all the time.
Hey folks, and welcome to the Health Hustle of Austin, Texas. On this show, we uncover the big ideas from your fellow health and fitness entrepreneurs in the Austin, Texas area about how they built their business and the lessons they learned along the way. I'm your host, Cory Hibbett, and on this episode, I had a chance to sit down with the guy, Cory Camp. I always make the joke that the E in my name stands for excellence, and this Cory, unfortunately, does not have an E in his name, but either way, he's a pretty dope dude. Cory is a communicator, creator, and community cultivator that's passionate about helping people have more fun through flow in their day-to-day life. Growing up, Cory competed as a swimmer where he found himself at the top of the sport only to feel empty when it all ended. This led him to create Forever Athlete, write 2 books, and host his own podcast show called Forever Athlete Radio. Some of the things that we get into are his early days of entrepreneurship, how to tap into flow states, the different types of flow triggers, what the skill/challenge balance is, tips for creating more content, why he uses fuck off headphones, excuse my language, chronotypes, a not so rapid fire question round, the 4 quadrant, and so much more. One last thing, if you're a health or fitness professional and you're having difficulties getting leads, I have a free 7-step process that walks you through how to convert your social media following into paying clients. You can find the link in the description of this episode. Without further ado, let's go. Cory Camp, welcome to the show. How you doing, brother?
Cory, man, thanks for having me.
You have the best name I've ever heard.
Dude, I know. Fun fact, I actually had my name spelled exactly the same as yours for 2 days. And then my dad decided he just didn't like the E, so he dropped it. Got my name changed 2 days
He took out the E for excellence, man.
Yeah, I know. I'm just slightly not as cool as you, not as excellent. It's okay.
Ladies
and gentlemen, I'm sorry if you're listening to this. You're going to be highly disappointed. I'm not as excellent as other Cory here.
C-O-R-Y. Sorry, man. I got a joke for you. What's the best exercise for swimmers?
I don't know.
Pull-ups.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I had a coach that told me if I wanted to really get better growing up, to do pull-ups every day. And like for probably like 6 straight months, every day after practice, I would just crank out as many pull-ups as I could until like my arms just were like one.
How many could you do in a row?
Dude, I mean, at that point, I was like a super skinny distance swimmer. I could knock out 35 to 40.
Damn.
Somewhere in there.
Total side note, we had this stupid bro fest at Squatch the other day with a bunch of the other meatheads trying to do like who could do the most pull-ups. It's the dumbest thing ever, but at the same time, it's so fun just to like see.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah. I think the max was like 25 maybe, but
there we go. 16-year-old me would be proud.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I definitely can't do that many now.
No. Well, I realized how much of it was a skill. Like the guy that was really good at it, he clearly has the skill of the rhythm of doing a pull-up versus like it's not necessarily a strength game as much as it is a skill game. Is what I found.
That, and I feel like there's so many factors of just how heavy are you?
Right.
In relation to like how strong you are.
Totally.
That definitely helps.
All right. Enough about that. Let's get into the show here. So first place I want to start with you is some of the earlier days of entrepreneurship and like when that seed was really planted for you. Cause like that's a great starting point for anyone that comes on the show and for other people to hear is like Where does that start? Because I know for me, it wasn't even till a little bit later in life before I even knew that was an option. So I'm always curious, like, where that starts for people.
Yeah, what's interesting for me is like both my parents were teachers, and so when I told them now, gosh, like 3 years ago, that I was gonna go out and go do my own thing, and I didn't really know so like fully what that was, but that I could be self-employed and make a living for myself, they looked at me like I had 7 heads, and they're like, where's this coming from? Don't you need a 401k? Don't you need health insurance and this, that, and another thing? I was like, yeah, like I do to some extent, but I can make it a different way than they're used to. And upon kind of like reflection, we were talking about this beforehand. On my dad's side of the business, my great grandparents came over from Germany back in the 20s, and they started the really first ever health food store in DC back in the 20s. So we're talking pre-Whole Foods, pre-Mom's Organic or Trader Joe's. Those things didn't exist back then. And they started what was known as Vita Foods. And Vita Foods essentially just took like the different co-ops that were producing fresh produce and the weight loss cookies, so to speak, like back in the day when those were a thing, and put them all under one roof. And they were able to run that business for a little over 60 years. They ended up selling it just before I was born in the mid 1990s. And all of that to say, I think when I really sat down and talked with my dad about, hey, look, like this is what I want to do, and he gave me some pushback, I was like, but is it any different than what your dad did? Because yes, it was a little bit different in the sense of like, I wanted to build something a little bit less tangible. I think that was the tough thing for him to wrap his head around. Even now, like 3 days later too, he's hitting me up like, so like, what does your day-to-day look like? Like, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? I was like, Dad, it's not a 9 to 5. And it was tough for him, and still is tough for him and a lot of people to wrap their head around that I'm not going into an office. I'm not like my grandfather going into a store, opening the store from X hour and closing it at Y hour and going home and starting over. I was like, Dad, it just kind of like never turns off. Like some days I might have a pocket of window of time like today where we can sit down in the middle of the day, record a podcast, but then that often means later on in the evening, I'm going to be working a little bit later than I typically would. So I think that's where it really started. And it was cool because at least I knew it was possible. But I more saw like the end result. Like I didn't ever see my grandfather working in the store. I had only heard stories. But instead I saw, hey, this is what happens when you go and do that. You can live for yourself and live on retirement and do pretty well. I was like, all right, cool. I want that. In a lot of ways, though, I wish I was around to see the ins and outs and be around that energy on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if it would change if I would do it or not, but at least I would have a better, quote unquote, understanding before I got into it.
Yeah, because like being around stuff like that humanizes it. I think that's something that people vastly underestimate is like even like meeting somebody famous or somebody you idolize or whatever, it just like brings it down to a level of like, oh, that's something I could do, and it just makes it real to you.
100%. And I think it demystifies it, and kind of one of the elements right around, I think, a lot of entrepreneurs and self-employed people now is the social media persona around it, of the glorification of like, oh yeah, like I got my laptop on the beach in Tulum and I'm answering emails. And it's like, that's not it. Oftentimes, I hate to say it, those self-employed entrepreneurs are kind of living off of some supplemental income, I would say, from maybe a parent figure.
Right.
And it's interesting to take that all with a grain of salt. But yeah, I wish I had seen that modeled, because there's just that energy and that buzz around it, and it would make it a lot more tangible and kind of boost my confidence from an earlier stage. Not to say I wasn't confident when I started. I definitely was. And I think what's beautiful about this game is like each passing day, each passing week, month, year, like I'm finding more and more clarity and more confidence in what it is that I'm doing and going that route.
I like that you called it a game. I talk a lot about that, of how the athletic world or the physical world is more like the game of athletic pursuits versus business is the game of like intellectual pursuits, but they're both a game to some degree. I want to circle back just for 1 second about your grandpa owning a health food store. For one, that seems very ahead of the game. And for two, was your grandpa like just really healthy, fit guy? Like I don't even understand like where that came from.
Yeah. So obviously with like what I do now with Forever Athlete, like athleticism runs in the family. My
Right.
dad swam in college for a rival college of mine. I went to Delaware. He went to Towson. So that was always fun, like trash talking. And then my grandfather, his dad, who owned this store, he ran track and field at University of Maryland. Now what's really interesting, right, is this is all stories I've heard of him. The grandfather that I was like alive and remember, he had diabetes and had all these other health issues. He was overweight. He wasn't very mobile. And it's very interesting to like hear these stories of like, oh yeah, like health and wellness was like a huge priority for him. And in my head, I'm like, well, what happened? Like at what point did that change? And I don't really have an answer for that. I wish he was still around so I could like actually sit down and get the answer directly from the source. But yeah, it was important to him. He was always, like most athletes, like looking for that next leg up, that next thing to put in his body, that supplement, that alternative, whatever, that's just going to give you that like slight edge. And I think that's the really fascinating part of like time-based sport. Like he was in track and field and then my dad and I being in swimming. It's like, dude, I would do crazy things just to like improve 100th of a second. Like I would experiment with beet doping and algae pills like spirulina to try to like replicate essentially red blood cell blood doping results in my blood to quote unquote improve my endurance, which now that like knowing what I know with the exercise science background was kind of ridiculous because endurance in the swimming world is a 15-minute race. So like while there might be some yield from that, the return on investment probably isn't there. Like I remember when I tried beet doping. Are you familiar with beet doping at all?
I know it's like a nitric oxide dilator or whatever.
Yeah,
but
so
I've never done it.
To elicit like actual results, the quantity of beets that you have to either consume, as in like eat, or you could supplement it with beetroot juice. Even the amount that you would have to drink prior to get any sort of result or benefit was insane. And I remember like sitting thinking to myself, I was like, is this worth the return? Like I'm about to pee my pants every time before I like go swim because I'm trying to like get, and I was like, I think I'd be better off actually just swimming my race and not having to worry about peeing my pants like while I swim my race, because it's kind of tough to physically perform at your best when you have to pee.
Yeah. Well, it says a lot about like how wrapped into that identity of being a swimmer that you are. I mean, I definitely have a similar story, and that's what I want to tap into a little bit with you here quickly about like that experience of being an athlete, being a swimmer, being somebody that wanted to compete at a super high level, and maybe the downfalls of some of that.
Yeah, I was about to say, I mean, a lot of what I look at now is flow and like looking at flow state. And that's what I think draws so many athletes into their respective sports. It's honestly what draws a lot of entrepreneurs into running their business, because they feel flow oftentimes as this byproduct of the autonomy that running the show gives you. It gives you freedom and control, and you can play around, you can play loose, and you create the expectations. And it's a really fun game when you set up the way to play it correctly. It's a really frustrating game as well. And
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
Literally just this morning, dude, this is so ironic of this conversation and why I'm so happy we're having this right now. Literally just this morning, I was hammering out a bunch of like content. And I recognized I was in such a flow state, just like boom, 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 one after the other. And I could feel like the dopamine hits coming like every single time I was pumping out a piece of content. And I got through like 20 pieces of content faster than most people would probably do in all day.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy hell, like that's what that feels like. And it felt amazing. I mean, so you're right. Like I've never really tied that also to the entrepreneur endeavor of that being in the same category, but you're 100% right.
Yeah. I mean, flow's addicting. It really is. And it's honestly one of those things where we feel the most fulfilled. There's a TED Talk right now that's going viral, and I'm blanking on the psychologist who gave it, but it was fantastic because it was around kind of this idea, this concept of fun leading to a healthier and more fulfilled life. And one of the components for more fun is flow. You need to have flow. You need to have actual enjoyment, like looking at limiting distractions and being present, a level of playfulness as well to have quote unquote real fun, not just saying like, oh yeah, like we Cory and I sat around and we were scrolling TikTok. It was so fun to spend quality time together. It's like, no, that's not actually it. So I digress a little bit, but flow is this like key ingredient in having a fun life and having a fulfilled life and feeling joy and happiness on a day-to-day basis. And I say all of that to say because there's a dark side of flow as well, right? So when we look at where we get flow, we can get it in multiple areas. We all are predispositioned to what's known as a primary flow activity. So some things come more naturally to us than others, aka like, why was I a swimmer? Most likely it was because swimming came easier to me than it might have been to you. Your respective sport might have come easier to you than to me. And therefore we continue to get positive reinforcement, and we get deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole. It becomes addicting. Like I became addicted to going best time after best time. And it was super cool. Even if that best time came 9 months, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years in between efforts, it was enough of a dopamine hit that it was like, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to get more. I'm going to get faster. I'm going to continue to train and repeat and repeat. The dark side, the downside of flow, you said it, you were like, it seems like swimming is a very high value to you, really a core piece of your identity, is your primary flow activity can't become your only piece of identity. And one of these catch-22 kind of just things that's probably not the right word for it. One of the catch-22 facts that has been studied in research around flow as a whole is that you can get psychologically locked out of flow when you lose access to your main way of feeling flow. So when athletes retire, that's why it's so challenging. If they only find their flow in their sport. When an entrepreneur sells their business and they feel then like empty, that's why, because they only find their flow in their business. So now that they don't have that vehicle anymore, they don't know where to drive. They don't know how to drive. So a lot of my story and what I'm about now is helping people recognize that, yes, you can actually get flow in other areas. In fact, you should get flow in other areas, because when you lose access point, you get injured, you get sick, you get benched, you get whatever. You need to be able to be reliant on driving another vehicle to find flow as well. And the more flow you get, the more flow you get. So if you're getting flow from sitting down on a podcast and jamming with someone, if you're getting flow from going to a gym like Squatch and feeling that sense of community and connectedness with the people there, you're going to show up more fulfilled, and you're going to actually find flow more easily in the other areas that you're trying to quote unquote force it. So I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, and we could just like go with flow. Because that's what I like absolutely jam on now.
Well, I never recognized that there was so much of an overlap of being able to carry it from one realm to the other. And that psychological lockout that you mentioned is really fascinating, because you hear that a lot with like athletes about, they quit, they retire, they leave their thing, and then like, they're miserable because I always associated it to more or less the identity within that, because like you tie your sense of self to something, and then once you lose that, now you start questioning like who you are and what your value is to the world. That's how I've always associated it. But I've never also seen that parallel of like how flow also plays into that as well, is because like so much of I feel like what you're saying is like flow in a bigger realm is like, we love progress as humans. We love getting better at things regardless of whatever it is. And like, that's a big piece of it, but it's cool how those overlap.
Yeah. I was about to say there's a dark side of flow too. Like you gave a positive example earlier this morning where you were able to bang out 20 pieces of content towards a clear objective that actually like serves you and like what you do. One of the constant, I think most prevalent dark sides would be, think of Angry Birds. Like, do you remember when Angry Birds first came out?
Yes.
It was the fastest growing app at that time. I think to 10 million users, it got there in like a week or two, which is absolutely insane when you think of the time and the access to smartphones and technology in the App Store back then. And part of the reason why is it's gamified in a way that elicits flow. You lose sense of time. You aren't distracted. You're just immersed in the game. And sometimes we see that with ADHD and OCD and these other traits that pop up on a day-to-day basis where, I mean, do you ever find yourself, I do this a lot, where I find myself like, I can't not clean my house. Like once I start getting started on it, I can't stop until it's completely clean. Like we're cleaning the kitchen sink, the floors are mopped, the vacuum came out, and I find flow in it. But it also means I probably just quote unquote wasted 2 hours, which I could have been applying somewhere else. So flow is a tricky one because you can't force it, and oftentimes it's not always geared towards something that is like a clear objective, moving the needle forward in an area that you like really want to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I was told the analogy of like getting into a flow state, or really like any sort of task. Like you gave the example of like cleaning your place, is that the hardest part is always the getting started with it. I was described it once of like it's like a plane taking flight. Is that like it takes so much energy and fuel just to get that plane into flight and to get you moving in direction. But like once you're in flight, you're just coasting at that point. You don't have to put a lot of energy into it. And I feel like that's so much of like how people get into flow states is like, that's why routines are so valuable, right? Is like, it reduces the friction or the barrier of flight so that you can now coast back into your flow state.
100%. And flow comes in this 4-stage cycle, right? So it's struggle is the first bit, which is exactly that. Like first, okay, we're loading up the plane, we're fueling up, we're getting ready. And it's frustrating. It's slow. Maybe there's a delay in boarding, whatever it is, right? And then the point there is when we're struggling, we want to struggle right up to the point where we're flirting with frustration, as I like to say. So we can flirt with frustration. We don't get actually frustrated, because once we get flustered, it's really hard to emotionally downregulate and come back down and find that sweet spot to then tap into flow. But if we can flirt with that line, I often, from a stress perspective, right? If you can look at getting your heart rate up just to that point of redlining, but not redline, you're in a good spot. You're in that sweet spot. Then you move into that second bit. You go into a release. In that release, what you're doing to your brain is you're giving it enough time to just like quiet down for a second, catch a deep breath, and find that focus in that flow, whatever that thing is that you're trying to find flow in on the back, or like the other side of that release. When I talk about release, I often want to note to people, like, it has to be something that is more boring than the thing that you're trying to find flow in. So a lot of people's go-to, like, they're sitting, here's a real life example. You're sitting, trying to bang out that content. Maybe you're having a harder time finding that flow. So what do? You probably pull out your phone, go on Instagram, start scrolling to be like, oh, well, I'm just going to give myself a little bit of a break. And then like the creative juices will start coming. No, wrong. It's not going to start coming, because scrolling and social media has been shown to be addictive and release all this dopamine. And now this task, this activity is more exciting, and your brain wants to keep consuming and doing more of it than getting into work. So on the back end, what is well-intentioned, supposed to be a good break, has now become a 30-minute procrastination period. And then you find yourself back in the struggle, because you catch yourself finally consciously, and you're like, damn it, why did I scroll for so long? Why did I was just supposed to be a 5-minute break, and 20 minutes went by, 30 minutes went by. I'm going to pick my phone up and throw it across the room. I'm done with it. I'm getting this content done, whatever it is. But really what you've just done is you've reset the struggle. You just go right back to you pass go, and you're right at go again. It's so frustrating. And that's how, honestly, a lot of people are living their life, is they don't implement that release, or a good quality release. And in doing so, they're just constantly living in that struggle phase, hoping haphazardly that they're going to find flow. And the challenge, really the real problem, is you can stumble upon flow just enough where you think that that's just how life is and that's going to work. And so you'll never actually make any changes. But if you take nothing else away from this conversation, like implementing good quality releases. It's like on the way over here, I did work up until the moment that I left. And then I was like, I'm just going to turn off the music on the way over to this podcast. Like no music. People, if anyone was like observing me, they'd be like, that dude's a freaking psycho. He's just driving 15 minutes in silence. I was like, yeah, I needed some release. Quote unquote, I needed to be bored, more or less.
Yep.
I needed to be bored in the car, so that when I popped in here, I was able to be on and then find flow here. And then flow is that third stage of the flow cycle, obviously. it's high energy. You're locked in. You're totally immersed in that experience. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what the sun's doing or what's for dinner. You're just locked in here. And then on the flip side, when you come out of flow, you have to be ready to recover. So implementing a longer recovery, whether that be sitting in some red light therapy, contrast therapy here is huge, as you know. You need to be able to hit some recovery because of how high energy flow is. You got to get that mind and body ready to hit back into that struggle phase again. And simply to simplify all of that into like one sentence, think of how an athlete warms up for a game. They go in, they get their body loose. That's the struggle phase. They hit pause for a second. It's not like they're warming up until the very last minute before the game. They maybe put some headphones on. They like go to the sideline, talk to the coach, whatever it may be. That's their release. Then the game starts. That's flow, ideally. And then on the back end, it's like, what do you want to do after a game? You just want to go home and nap. You just want to like take a break, chill. That's the recovery period. And then you get up and do it all over again. The cool thing is as entrepreneurs, we have this opportunity to set up our day in that flow cycle as like a roadmap. So you can start your day with a struggle phase, putting that hardest task first, but then reward yourself with a little bit of a release before you have to then go find flow and whatever that creative thing may be. And that's a whole nother tangent, but I know I just threw a lot at you.
Dude, no, you threw gold at me is what you
There
threw
you
at me,
go.
because I had so many epiphanies right there. And honestly, the biggest one is that idea of release. It's one of the reasons that I legitimately like hide my phone, turn it off, and like get it as far away from me as humanly possible, because I know what'll happen if I start clicking or scrolling or whatever it is. And I remember it was Cal Newport, who I'm sure you're familiar with, would always talk about it. But I don't think he ever used the word release. But one of the things that he talks about is exactly what you said, of like those moments of boredom where, yeah, it's great, take a break. But his recommendation was always like, stare out the window.
Yeah.
Or just like
Stare at a white wall.
Yeah, or sit in silence for a little bit, or like maybe lay down and stretch for a moment, or whatever it was, something that wasn't overly stimulating to what you were previously doing, which I think is the biggest takeaway that I got out of everything that you just explained. And this, honest full disclosure, I didn't expect this to go this direction. I didn't know this is where this
I was
conversation
about to say,
was going.
dude, even like when I walked in, you were foam rolling.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like you were scrolling at the same time you were foam rolling. Like you were just single task foam rolling. And I think that's a huge thing too, is like we as a society, I think as entrepreneurs, as quote unquote self-proclaimed high performers in that regard, that language gets thrown around a lot. Like we are under the impression that we need to be doing multiple things at once. Like if you're not posting a TikTok while you're running and like calling your mom at the same time, like you're not doing enough today.
No.
It's like, no, that quite literally couldn't be further from the truth. Those who are truly the most dangerous, I think, in their output and that we admire the most, especially in this sense. I mean, dude, we live in Austin and we're really blessed to have some really great people to model just in our immediate culture and in our immediate environment. They're relentless at single tasking. They're relentless at when they sit down to write an email. Like I think of Ryan Holiday and when he does like the Daily Stoic stuff, like homeboy's not checking Instagram as he's writing the email. Like he's just writing the email, or he's just writing whatever it may be, or recording that meditation. And that's what we need to try to do more of, which is very challenging as a business owner in today's society, especially if you're self-employed and like it's just you, or you're just starting off, you have a small team around you. There's so many hats that we have to wear. We have to be the marketer. We have to be the actual practitioner. We have to be sending email, like whatever it may be. We're the customer service. We're the face of the brand all at once. You can be good at all of those if you don't try to be good at all of those at the same time.
Totally.
Like actually give yourself that block. Like from 10 to 1, I'm going to be the practitioner. I'm going to show up and I'm going to like be the coach or the trainer, and provide my services the best that I can. Then I know that I'm finding flow in that period, so I'm going to recover hopefully on the back end. And then I'm going to switch hats and I'm going to do whatever that thing is a struggle. Maybe I'm learning a new skill. I'm learning funnels for my business to optimize my website a little bit. That's something that there's so much of a learning curve there. It's going to be harder for me to find flow. So I'm better off putting that in the struggle category. And one of the most important things there is like, I kind of said it, struggle is vital to actually improving skill. Flow is vital for showcasing skill. So you're not necessarily learning a new skill in real time when you're in flow. Often you can, but it's not all the time. Rather, you learn that in the struggle phase. So instead of running from struggle, running from it's not moving as fast as I can or whatever it may be, embrace it, because that's when you actually cultivate a skill. And one of there's 22 different flow triggers. Like when these 22 different things are present, the likelihood that you find flow increases tenfold or 22-fold. One of them, if not, I'm not going to go into all 22 because we'd be here all day, but in my opinion, the easiest one to wrap your head around is what's called the challenge skills balance. So on one axis, you have the level of challenge, the task at hand, whatever it may be. It could be recording a podcast. If I've never recorded a podcast before, my current skill level is going to be next to 0 compared to the actual challenge at hand. Especially if I know it's a big podcast and there's tens of thousands, whatever listeners, I'm going to be a lot more nervous. So that wouldn't be a great time for me to try to cultivate the skill of being a storyteller and coming on a podcast, would it? And just I always relate it back to athletics, right? If I were to take my 4-year-old self who was just getting into swimming and learning for the first time and throw him into a workout that I did at college, I would quite literally drown. I wouldn't survive. I would be ridden with anxiety. I probably wouldn't even start. I wouldn't even get into the pool. The challenge skills ratio is out of whack there. So when the challenge is too high compared to our current skill level, we feel anxious. We feel overwhelmed. We feel frozen. We won't act. On the flip side, if our skill is too great for the challenge, then we feel apathetic. We're way more likely to procrastinate. We don't really care about the thing. We could be depressed even. It's just I don't even know what the point is anymore. It's why people ask me, why don't I do master swimming oftentimes? I was like, because the level of challenge wasn't there. I did it for 3 meets post-grad. In my first race, I dove in and I was 4 body lengths ahead of everyone else. And I said, this is stupid. This is a waste of my time. What am I doing here? I wanted competition. I wanted challenge and I wasn't getting it. And so when you're looking to try to fine tune your day for more flow, oftentimes sitting there and being if I'm struggling, what's that challenge skills balance? What is the task at hand authentically and real? How's your skill level correspond to it, and start to adjust accordingly, right? So if I've never sent emails before, why am I going to have this unrealistic expectation that I'm going to bang out 100 emails in an hour? It's not happening. Just like if you had never created content before, it would be kind of unrealistic to say, I'm going to knock out 20 pieces of content in X amount of time, versus you've been doing it for a little while. So you've cultivated that skill. Now it's a good goal for you. It's a motivating goal to say, I can knock out 15 to 20 in this time block that I put aside. And so when you start to time block as a business owner, have that challenge skills ratio in the back of your mind. And if you find yourself not hitting that objective in that given time block, you can start to look at, well, do I need more time, or do I need to reduce the amount of things that I was trying to get done in that time block? There's nothing wrong with that. That's doing yourself a disservice if you don't actually make adjustments, because we're constantly getting feedback. We only fail if we don't actually take anything from the feedback that we're getting. That's the game of entrepreneurship. We're trying new things and we're getting feedback. You only lose this game if you get the same feedback over and over again and you just keep doing the same thing and expecting something different. But instead, it's making little tweaks. The amount of times that I've seen, I've created a piece of content and I'm I know that this concept will hit. And I put it out there and something about it flops. It just doesn't get the traction that I know it can get. Instead of being oh, okay, that was a shitty idea, I'm never touching that again. It's no, I know there's something there. I just need to tweak something. If it's not getting the traction that I think, what's going on in the first 5 seconds of the video? Can I change that opening hook? Can I change how I'm grabbing people's attention slightly? Maybe it's a different word choice, using a simile or anything else. maybe I need to be a little bit more descriptive in the 5 to 10 second window of the video, because I'm looking at watch time and seeing how long people are listening, and it's dropping off at 10 seconds. Why? What happened there? And then I'll redo the video. There's nothing wrong with putting out the same concept multiple times. The amount of content people are consuming on a day-to-day basis, no one ever really notices. No one ever, I'll even out myself. Like, very rarely do people notice that I use about the same 100 B-roll clips for all of my content. Like, it's the same 100 clips that I just mix and match. And I do so like just enough variety where people never really pick up on it. So that's the secret.
I had a mentor once that basically taught me, like, go back over your last like 6 months of content and pull out the ones that have done really well and basically just like reshuffle it and reuse it, because you're right, most people don't pay attention anyways. And thank you for having another like golden moment there for me of realization of that the 20 pieces of content that I pushed out. You're right. There was like that perfect balance of like skill to challenge ratio, because yeah, somebody could say like, yeah, just sit down and knock out 20 pieces of content, but they're underestimating the fact that I've been creating content every single day for years.
Yeah.
And so like there was a lot of building up a skill of to be able to learn how to write and what's a good hook line and what's going to be good copy and everything else that goes with that. So.
I was about to say, think of the early stage business owner, maybe the person listening to this that just started their private practice or whatever it may be, and they know social media is important, and they've seen the Gary V's and the other talking heads on the social media game being like, you have to be posting 3 to 5 times a day.
That's insane.
And there's some validity in that, in the sense of like, I took that to heart early on when I talk about identity, like started to identify as a creator and started to be like, no, I'm not, instead of sitting there and being like, I'm not a TikToker, I'm not a YouTuber, I'm not a whatever. And I just said, no, I'm a creator. It's a part of what I do. It's not all that I do. I can't just be a creator because I'm not good enough at it yet to pay the bills. But if I put intentional time and effort and energy behind it, I'm going to get better. And so I accelerated my growth curve by going into 3 to 5 pieces of content a day. Now, I understood going into that, like, what that truly meant to me. And I also said, okay, to make that easy, 2 of those 3 are going to be a trend. You know what I mean? Like, just a simple voiceover where I'm like, whatever the trending sound is, I'm just going to use that. Boom, good, we're good. And then 1 piece will be an original a piece of content. And then I was able to A/B test and go from there. And I say all of that to say, like, if someone finds themselves in that early stage of they've heard over and over again, they're hearing right now that content, yes, is important. Marketing, yes, is important. Find your level of hard, find that current skill level and meet yourself where you're at. Maybe it's 1 quality piece of content a week. If that's what it is for you to find flow and like actually get excited about it, awesome. Once you get in that habit, great. Let's crank it up a little bit. Like, start to improve that intensity, crank up that intensity and the consistency. And then all of a sudden, the more, it's just science, right? The more reps you get, at some point, there's going to be diminishing returns. But for the most part, the more reps you get, the faster you're going to accelerate that skill growth curve. And you're going to actually see a huge level of improvement, rather than saying, oh, I'm not a creator, I'm not a marketer, I suck at that, whatever. One, I think there has to be that belief in that identity that, like, yes, you can be. And in fact, you need to be in this day and age. Like, that's just a simple fact with how businesses have turned. So embrace it and then get your reps in where you can.
Can we circle back to you personally as to like, no, this is all great. I just want to, I still am very fascinated by this whole concept of flow. It's phenomenal. And I think honestly, anybody listening to the show right now, it can be super helpful in just knowing the audience of other people that are business owners and entrepreneurs or self-employed or whatever, is that I think really what I want to help people with is maybe like for you, for example, is like, what are some of the things that you use personally maybe to get into your flow states, or maybe something that people could learn from just like your own personal experiences of like, this is maybe how you structure things, or these are like routines or rituals that you use. So like other people listening to the show could be like, oh yeah, like I can implement that and like get more work done essentially.
Yeah. I was about to say, so for me, I found, so when I first started Forever Athlete, and like before I even knew it was going to be called Forever Athlete, and just, I left the assistant fitness director role that I was in and was just like, I'm going to roll with this. We're going to see what happens. I struggled a lot because all of a sudden now the structure was totally gone and I was just given freedom. It was like, oh, I went from teaching 12 plus classes, having like 20 plus personal training clients, teaching a swim program, all of this stuff to, okay, so when do you want to wake up? Like when do you want to do this? And I found myself quickly filling my time with things that I confused for moving the needle forward. Like I was sitting down with anyone and everyone, and it helped that I think it was still like early COVID days where everyone was like suddenly available and free and able to meet. And I met a lot of really good people, but what I learned was I can't do that every day. Like there does need to be some energy and time focused on tasks that actually have a monetary return on investment for me, especially early on, right? Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be able to play the game of entrepreneur for very, very long. You're running on limited resources. So I found myself very quickly, when I first started, it started off as group coaching for former athletes. I took them through this transformational, like personal development mixed with a workout program. I called it More Than Movement. And I said, hey, we're gonna do personal development, but we're gonna do it a little bit differently, because when I read a lot of the personal development books that exist out there, they're great. They didn't really speak to me as an athlete. Like if I was still holding on to that identity, I felt like I needed to shed that to really get a lot out of it. And I said, there's probably a lot of other athletes out there like me. And through conversations I was having, I was right. I was onto something. So I started to tell my story of, this is who I was. This is what happened. This is who I am now. It's a really simple way to kind of share a simple story arc in any piece of content that you put out there. It becomes really relatable because people can see and relate to who you were. Then you give them the aha secret sauce, like what happened to you. And then you gave them, okay, this is what happened. So, I mean, who I was when I first started, I didn't have any boundaries. I didn't have any rules in place for myself. It was just willy-nilly, like, okay, cool. Like, let's go build a business today. And then I realized, like, at the end of the day, because I had no metrics to measure, I had a calendar, but I wasn't really managing it well. It just was like, okay, Cory, here's my Zoom link. Like, here's my calendar. Like, whatever you need, pop on, like, whatever time works for you. And then I quickly found myself with like 20 meetings a day with people that were just, oh yeah. And they were good conversations, but they weren't actually moving the needle forward for me. They were just validating like what I had an idea of was a good concept. And what I realized after a number of months was I didn't need any more validation that what I had is a good concept. I needed to actually prove my concept through results. And that was when things started to shift for me, because in full transparency, I found myself, I want to say 6 months in, and I tapped into my 401k from my job because I was like, I don't have any money. Like I have 3 clients and they all paid in full. So, and I've already spent that money that they paid me. What do I do? Like rent's due next month. How am I going to make that meet? All right, well, if I pull the 401k out, like great. And people might hear that and be like, that's super irresponsible. And trust me, I know, like I was learning and still am learning in that process. But I share that to say, because afterwards it gave me enough of a lifeline to then look at, well, how do I build something a little bit more sustainable? So I started to look at naturally, like, how is my energy throughout the week? And I found myself like on Mondays, I like a lighter day to start the week. I like to be able to do maybe a podcast like this as we're recording on a Monday, but I also like to do more of the actual content creation because it's fun for me. I like to do more of the behind the scenes, whether it be podcast promotion, podcast recording, anything that falls into that category, that for me gets done on Mondays. And I know that it's like, it's in this container of Monday, so that when I show up on Monday, I can play within that container, but I also make sure that it doesn't spill over into every single day. Then I've found for me, I work best seeing clients just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I work with 12 people at any given time. That's usually 6 hours of calls on Tuesday, usually 6 hours of calls on Thursday. Again, that's what I found works for me. My brain is able to like clearly recognize when I wake up on Tuesday, cool, it's go time. I have one role today. I'm a coach. I'm going to show up and I'm going to be a service provider, and I'm going to serve the people that need me and have hired me as a coach and do that. I'm not going to take random coffees. I'm probably going to have a shorter workout accordingly, but I know why. Wednesdays, kind of, again, leave it a little bit more free flowing. Any behind the scenes, like if I'm building something larger, like I just wrote an ebook on, I called it the Life Playbook for athletes. So taking a lot of these concepts and like putting it into an actual like 50-page workbook. That got done primarily on 2 different Wednesdays. Like I wrote it in 2 weeks, but it was because I had these clear boundaries that I sat down on Wednesday and I said, this is the task for the day. And I'm going to set my flow cycle where I'm going to work on it for an hour and a half, because anything longer than 90 minutes is harder to sustain flow in. Like you're more likely, it's the nature of the world that we live in, like distraction is going to come in at some point during that. So knowing that accordingly, and it's like, all right, cool. I'll put on, this is something super tangible for a lot of people. Can I curse on this? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. I have my fuck off headphones. And so like, even when I co-work with people, like I'll tell people if I'm co-working with them, I go, hey, just so you know, like if I put these headphones on, they're my fuck off headphones. Like don't, like, unless someone is dying, like don't bother me while these are on. And they're like, some people look at me and be like, dude, it's not that serious. We're just like co-working. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I've co-worked with plenty of people in this space where they don't actually want to co-work. They just want to talk. They just want to chat with me. And so I need to be respectful of my own time. And I'm asking that you do the same when I have these headphones on. So limiting those distractions, right? And then for me, Fridays, I find myself more social on Fridays. I think that's just the nature of the rhythm of our society as a whole. I mean, in the corporate world, right? You get to Friday and it's like, oh yeah, like it's the weekend. It's really tough for me to sit and do computer work or like logistics or whatever it may be, admin stuff. So I don't plan it on Friday, especially Friday afternoon. Unless I have like an absolute deadline, then it's getting put Friday morning. But beyond noon, I just know myself and I know the temptations and things that come up for me. And I'm like, that doesn't serve me. So it's like oftentimes, well, it's honestly so hard, quote unquote, to connect with people sometimes. I mean, you get it. And here in Austin, people all the time, oh, yo, let's grab coffee. Let's go grab a workout. I'm like, dude, I would honestly love to, but I have to have these scalable rules. Personally, I have to have these scalable rules in place, because if I don't, I find myself doing a 3-hour workout Monday afternoon with you. And then I find myself like grabbing coffee with someone right before it. And then next thing I knew, 6 hours go by and I made really good connection, but I didn't really do anything of that day. I didn't move the needle forward. So I've found that for me, having clarity on the day-to-day has been able to increase my output tenfold, because the best analogy I can give people, it's like a sandbox. A sandbox is only fun if you have a box. If you don't, you just have sand, and that disappears pretty quickly. If you have money but no budget, like that money, like poof, disappears into thin air very quickly. You need a budget. You need a box for whatever realm it is that you're trying to play in, because it gives you the rules of the game. It allows you then to get creative and stretch that dollar. I can't tell you how creative I've had to get with bootstrapping this company and like quote unquote having no money. You know what I mean? Like the first retreat I hosted, I do these away games. I did one here in Austin, February of last year. And I looked and I was like, ooh, it's going to be pretty costly for me to like rent an Airbnb. How can I like find a way around this? And I hit up a buddy who was living in the Amley South Shore, and I said, hey, can I use the Amley's like amenity spaces? And he's like, well, like you have to email the leasing office. I was like, no. Can you scope it out for me? Like how often are people using those? He's like, no one's ever like really in there. I was like, cool. We're going to run a 3-day retreat there, and we're not going to reserve it. We're just going to we're going to run a retreat. And he's like, what? And I was like, yeah, like I'll sell tickets for a 3-day experience, and people will just stay elsewhere. They'll stay at Airbnbs and hotels or whatever. And we'll make this ticket like super cheap. Like I charged $200 for a 3-day experience. And I was like, cool, we'll have all the personal development workshops will just happen like in these conference rooms throughout the Amley building. And I was able to then like reach out to all these brand partnerships that I had over the years, the relationships that I've built. Often because I didn't have those boundaries, I was just meeting with people willy-nilly, and I was finally able to tap into them where I could reach out to like a drink poppy and be like, hey, I'm bringing 15 people together in Austin in 2 weeks. Like, can you send us some soda? And they're like, yeah. Like, here's 90 cans of soda. Here you go. And it's like tapping into Snap Kitchen and being like, hey, this is what I'm doing, perfecting that pitch. And they said, yeah, sure. Here's 40 meals. And so I was able to get really, really creative and stretch this dollar where I was actually able to turn somewhat of a profit. Like, it wasn't like a $10,000 experience, but it didn't need to be. If anything, it was brand equity that was being built, proof of concept, getting actual tangible content. Because what I had been doing with building community in the former athlete space up until that point was all virtual. And what I had realized, this is in early 2022, everyone's tired of seeing Zoom. Like, no one wants to be like, hey, yo, look at my Zoom community. Like, these 10 boxes on the screen, like, there's some really dope people in there. It's like, that has lost its cool. You know what I mean? So I wanted to play on that.
The thing I want to double tap from all that incredible information that you just dropped about the value of setting boundaries and having fuck off headphones and like valuing your time and what it's actually worth. Because I can relate to this so much. It's actually one of the reasons that I literally, as much as humanly possible, do not do any meetings before 2 p.m. Hence the reason this podcast is at this time.
Perfect.
Is that between the hours of like when I wake up until roughly 2 p.m. most every single day, that is my time to move the needle. And that's in, honestly, most areas of my life, from journaling to meditating to deep work to getting an exercise in. And then around 2 p.m. is when I'm done with my stuff and I'm ready to take on the world. And a lot of people see that as like selfish. But honestly, at the end of the day, the amount of impact it's had on me to be able to just like serve the world at a higher level, it's unbelievable how important that is for me.
I was about to say, it's not selfish. It's the most selfless thing you can do, because you've recognized that that's what you need to fill yourself up to then pour into those people that you're meeting with. I mean, I believe you'd be doing people a disservice if you were to take meetings during that like sacred time for you, because you wouldn't be present for it. You'd be sitting there at 10 a.m. being like, yeah, this coffee is great, but I got fucking like 10 things to go do at home, man. Like, can you stop talking? I gotta leave. Whereas when you have those boundaries in place and you are selfish, you take that time for you, you're able to then allow so much more to come out because you're able to just truly drop in with people. I noticed the same thing. And I think one of the things, are you familiar with chronotypes and biorhythms in that sense?
Not biorhythms.
So similar, you've heard of chronotypes then,
Yep.
of like third bird, morning lark.
Yep.
And all of that. For those not familiar, essentially genetically wired, we have this predisposition to, some of us are morning people, some of us are a little bit later morning people, and then others are more of that night owl, staying up late. Our body goes through a natural biorhythm, like our circadian rhythm. We're very cyclical beings.
Totally.
We're most familiar with like the female cycle, right? On a monthly basis, we go through, as humans, go through a cycle on a really minute by minute, like daily basis as well. And when that cycle starts is dependent on your chronotype. So if you're a morning person and we're talking like you really get excited and energized waking up before 6 a.m., like naturally you're a morning person, you're going to be better suited to put your higher energy thinking tasks in the morning. Like first thing in the morning, you'll be able to dive right into those, that deep work, that reflective, whatever it may be. You'll find yourself more creative in the afternoon, almost like when you find your brain is like too tired and it starts to think a little bit more lucidly. That's great for creativity because you're starting to create connections through things that otherwise, when your logic brain is like turned all the way on, like hyper mode, it just doesn't see, because it's like, no, that's not logical. But when you're a little bit tired, a little bit wary, you're like, wait, that actually makes sense. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why, like right now, you're like, I'm having all these epiphanies, like all these things are connecting for me, and like your circuitry is just lighting up. I say all that to say, on the flip side, then like your night owls, if you're better off doing your higher focused, higher energy work later into the afternoon / into the evening, because that's when you're predispositioned to the likelihood of you finding flow is higher in those periods. It doesn't mean that it's impossible. Like, it's not impossible for you to find flow if you had a project deadline that you had to hit. And I said, Cory, I need you at 10 p.m. tonight to like sit down and crank out some work. Like, it wouldn't be impossible. It would just be working against your physiology, and it would be a little bit harder to get there. So that, I think that's really important for people to understand about themselves. One of the easiest ways that you can do this, I mean, you can Google chronotype tests or whatever, but the simplest way is like, if you had nothing to do tonight, nothing to do tomorrow morning, when are you waking up tomorrow? Like, what time are you going to bed and when are you waking up? And then if that answer of when you're waking up is 6 a.m. or earlier, you're a morning bird. If it's 6 a.m. to like 9 a.m., great. You're a third bird. You follow that same biorhythm as the morning bird. Just shift everything 3 hours later. Like, you're better off. Like, you probably benefit from like a slower build morning routine. And then if you're a night owl, just flip that. Like, reverse everything that I just said. Take your meetings in the morning. Go see your friends for coffee. Get that workout with your buddy in the quote unquote later morning, at 10 a.m. or whatever, because you're gonna be doing yourself a disservice if you try to be if you're a night owl and you try to play your life as a morning bird. It's just, you're making it harder for yourself. And that's, I think, one of the most freeing things about going self-employed is you now have the freedom to play to that as best as you can. Whereas the corporate culture, it's really set up in a way that favors the morning bird, and that's it. Like, if you're not an early bird, you're kind of screwed with the whole 9 to 5 thing. Totally. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, that was one of my biggest frustrations, honestly, working a quote unquote corporate job, was like the inability to structure my day in the way that I know me personally could be the most effective. It was very frustrating to have to play on someone else's timeline when I knew I was showing up as the less of a person just because I had to play on that timeline. That was super challenging for me. I'd be curious as to, you've dropped so much knowledge, man, and you've been so helpful.
We can just keep going.
Honestly, like, you've helped me so much, and I'm sure a million other people listening. I'd be curious as to, I know last time we got together for coffee, speaking of coffee meetings, we talked about how so many of the things we're doing are aligned. From, you have a podcast show, you're coaching, you're consulting, you do retreats as well. We have so much overlap. What's the future for you? Or like, where do you see things going moving forward for you? Of like, what's the ultimate goal?
Yeah, man. I actually co-founded this app called Seek that you and I have kind of talked about, and we're gearing up for a private MVP launch here in Austin at the end of January, which I'm like super excited about. And really the goal of that is to help people create better, real, genuine connections through unique in real life experiences. So if you think how the social media platforms right now, they're geared towards helping you like find other people like you, sort of, but like you have to do a lot of work and the algorithms work a certain way. What we're trying to do is shake things up. Like, we want people to use Seek for literally like 5 minutes a day. Like, we don't want you on that platform for the end of time. I would much rather you use that platform. You find an experience. Like, for example, you're looking to play pickleball because you just got into it. Like, I just got into pickleball when I was back home, playing with my dad for the first time. I'm hooked.
Nice.
Looking for people to play with. And I could go to Google and I could say, yeah, like pickleball leagues near me. And I'm very introverted actually. So there's like that element of social anxiety around, like, one, I don't like going to places. I don't feel super comfortable going to places if I don't know at least one person. So if I were to Google like pickleball meetup and see that 10 people are playing at the park at X time, like, the odds of me actually going there, slim to none, because I don't know anyone.
Sure.
With Seek, what we're doing is you're able to see, you can search pickleball meetup or pickleball whatever, and with that you can see, oh, there's a pickleball gathering going on, play with potluck lunch associated with it or something this Saturday at 1 p.m. And I can see ahead of time like who's going. I can see who else is RSVP'd, and I can click on their profiles, learn a little bit more about them. I can only connect with them actually after the experience. So it's not like the Instagrams of the world where you can be like, oh yeah, like I'm going to creep on this person. They're cute. I'm going to like send them a DM ahead of time. No, we want to inspire in real life connection. So you need to go to these events, these experiences, put yourself out there. We're just making it a little bit easier, a little bit safer to do so in the same breath. Like everyone that's going to be on there hosting experience is pre-vetted by us. Just like an Uber driver is like pre-vetted by Uber. We're doing the same thing with who's running these experiences. So it's not necessarily just Joe Schmo off the street being like, oh yeah, I want to host, I want to get people together. It's like, no. They're professionals, the people that are bringing people together in this app. So that's the future for me. Is I'm the chief product officer there right now. So head of product, which is super cool, totally beyond, if I'm being really honest, like my scope of practice and my expertise. But I've realized I've learned how to connect people really, really well over the years. And I've done that through my own events. And so to be able to have a lot of say in how an app can be designed to do just that is super cool, because I've partnered up with people that actually have the technological wherewithal to execute on what's going on in my head. I texted my co-founder the other day because I was like, dude, we should have like a brand asset page in our Notion. And he was like, all right, cool. And he set it up, and I was like, I told him what I wanted in it. And the way he set it up, I was like, dude, this is exactly what I wanted. But like, I didn't even know how to communicate that that's like what I wanted. Like I wanted the brand coloring, and he gave me all the hex color, like variations in a gradient.
Jeez.
And I was like, I needed that, but I didn't know how to articulate that. So it's really cool when you pair up with a co-founder, I think, that speaks the same language as you.
So is this dinner that I'm going to this week, are you vetting me? Is that what's happening right now?
It's an interview, dude. That's a fun fact. I'm going to wine and dine you.
Didn't even know. Now I do. Is this app going to be out anytime soon, or do we even have a launch date for anything?
I was about to say, so January 31st is going to be the private beta for Austin.
End of this month.
End of this month.
So by the time this episode comes out, that should almost be out. Maybe not yet.
You tell me.
I don't think it'll be out yet.
All good.
Soon. But okay. So I have a round of rapid fire questions for you. First thing that comes to mind. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What's your best business advice?
You don't have to know to get started. Just be curious, and it can change as you go. Like, you don't have to be wed to that same idea as day one, on day 50, on day 100. Just be curious. Keep staying curious as you go, and you'll stumble upon that purpose later on down the road.
The art of the pivot. What's your best marketing advice?
Talk with your audience. Don't talk at them. Tell a good story that's relatable. Speak with them. Come around the same side of the table as them and be like, Cory, let me tell you this time that I did X, Y, and Z. This is who I was. This is what happened. This is who I was afterwards. And do so in an empowering tone. I'll also add, take a second to like set an intention. Like I always, before I record any content, I ask myself, what's the intention? How do I want this person that consumes this to feel? And how can I achieve that? Doing that has made my content and marketing 20 times. I can't even put a number actually on it, because it just has changed the game of the amount of people now that will reach out and be like, dude, I feel like your content lately has been so on point. It's like speaking directly to me, like directly with me. I can relate so heavily. I'm like, yeah, it's because like I took some time to set an intention of how I wanted you to feel when you watch this.
I don't want people to miss that word you used, feel. It's a very important word that I think people underestimate. That's my whole game in marketing.
Have you read Emotion by Design by Greg? I'm blanking on his last name.
No.
So he was the Nike. He worked for Nike for 30 years. Story on the brand side, storytelling and everything. It's a fantastic book. He talks a lot about literally emotion by design. Like how, if you look at Nike's best campaigns over the past 30 years, he has had a hand in a lot of them. And what Nike does very, very well is they evoke emotion. And there's so much more than, like when you wear a swoosh, it's a choice. It's not just like because it's quote unquote the best shirt or the best shorts, but you feel connected to the brand. And that's because they've become masters at evoking emotion in their audience so that you feel compelled. You feel compelled when Colin Kaepernick takes a knee and Nike starts a whole campaign around it. And they say, basically, like, this is who we are. We're taking a stand with him. and their jersey, his black Nike jersey, like sells out like that instantly. It's because they're masters of emotion behind all of their marketing.
Dropping that in the show notes for sure. What's your favorite part about entrepreneurship?
The constant flexibility of the game.
Game. I love the game analogy, man. When are you the most productive? I bet you're a morning bird.
Morning, 100%. I am super weird. Like a little hack for morning birds. You could actually, so sleep waves are most similar to the brain waves that are going on in our brain during flow. And morning birds are more likely to be able to take advantage of this, but literally like the amount of times that I'll roll out of bed right into work, and it's just like total like taboo in this like self-care world. Roll out of bed right into work. No phone. It only works if you have like clearly laid out what exactly you're going to do in that time period. I can't tell you how like crazy productive during that time period.
Motherfucker. So today, this morning, when I'm telling you about the fucking content I pumped out, this was the first time in a long time that's what I did. Most mornings for me is journal and meditation. But this morning, knowing what I wanted to get done and the feeling that I had this morning of just like almost this like hint of excitement to get into it, I was like, fuck it, I'll just meditate later. I actually meditated literally before we got together, like for 20 minutes, because I normally do first thing in the morning.
I could tell.
Yeah, you could feel it. But oh my God, I didn't realize that is also a hack. Like the ability of like leveraging that little piece of excitement for a morning bird to get right into like what you want to do for that day.
It's literally all life is like the coaching I do is life optimization coaching. And I tell people all the time, like what works for me might not work for you, but it's all one big experiment. Like all we constantly do is find things that work for you and do more of that, and find what doesn't work for you and do less of that. Like that is the simplest way you can improve your life. And having just almost like the balls to be like, like everyone in their mother is telling me I need to meditate, I need to read, I need to journal.
Sure.
I mean, dude, the amount of people here in this city in particular that are reliant on like a 3-hour morning routine before like getting into work, they'd be so much better off just like picking one of those things. It's not gospel that you need to do all of those things at the same time or before you jump into the first thing. Like there's validity in like there's 6 non-negotiables when it comes to peak performance: gratitude, mindfulness practice, movement of some kind, hydration, sleep, and social interaction. And so with those 6, there's no like that you need those 6 to like every day to really access peak performance. But no one's telling you to do all 6 of those before you hop into work, before you're trying to find flow.
Right.
Just find what works for you. If you find yourself more compelled to socialize at 5 p.m., awesome, go do it. You don't have to do it throughout the day. It's the problem, I think, with our space is people want to socialize all the time.
I think you're unlocking a lot of keys in my head today. Is this a coaching call?
This is a therapy session.
I didn't realize I was sitting down, although I feel like podcasting is always therapy, honestly, at the end of the day. Who is your inspiration?
I'd say Stephen Kotler. He's
that's who I thought you were going to say earlier in terms of like the TED Talk. It wasn't him.
No, it wasn't Stephen, but I've read all of his books. I ended up going through
the Flow
Flow.
guy.
Yeah, I was about to say he started Flow Research Collective. I went through their Flow coaching program about 1.5 years ago, which is where I learned a lot of this stuff. So model a lot of the information that I bring and the way that I live my life based off of his research and what he's been able to show is possible. I mean, the dude has written literally so many books and like lived 20 different lives. It's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I heard him recently on, I think it was Lewis Howes' podcast, maybe. Yeah, he's a very clear thinker, which I'm sure is contributed by all of his like writing and flow states that he gets into. But yeah he's great. Tell me one secret about you or just something most people don't know about you. You could share your drowning story if you wanted.
I feel like I've talked about that one on enough podcasts.
All right.
People know that one.
All right. Give me another one then.
Dude, I would just say like I'm really fucking weird. I don't know. Like I feel like
Most swimmers are, right?
Yeah, dude. I mean, you have to be weird if you find joy in staring at a black line for 4 hours. But I, like when I'm with like my really close friends, like I love to just like talk in random like strange voices and just I'm weird, man. Like that's just it. But it's fun. It's fun to me, like to just let loose, and I don't do it often. So yeah, that's a fun fact.
Self-proclaimed weirdo. We'll take it.
I'll own it, dude.
What would you change about yourself?
I mean, if I could be just like 1% handsomer, that would be great. That's the clip. Man, that is a good one. I wish I would care less. No, I feel like it's like a really shitty like job interview. Like, what's your biggest weakness? It's like,
I'm too nice.
It's a good question. I will say, like, if I could continue to improve on my ability to let go of certain things, like let things run a certain course. Like for example, this is a funny example. On my run a few days ago, I had finished like it was a tempo run, like finished the hard stuff. I'm on this like 2 mile cool down, taking my time, kind of like zoning out, whatever. And I'm running on East 5th, and there's like a rock in the middle of the sidewalk. Don't see it. Right foot catches it, and I just like face plant onto the ground. And I'm like, motherfucker, who put that rock there? Like, and I do an out and back pretty much every time. I was like, I did not see that rock on the way out. Like, who planted this in the past hour? Like, why is that there? They're out to get me. And my self-talk at times can be like letting that rock have power over me for an extended period of time throughout that day. So it's something that I've been very conscious of over the years, where I used to be very, very triggered, where I'd be like 2 days later, it'd be like, dude, that fucking rock, man.
Really?
And I think it was just kind of ingrained in like that athletic mindset in a lot of ways of trying to constantly improve. And when something doesn't go wrong, like hyper fixating on the thing that didn't go wrong to try to like run it back and like do it differently. And that's one of the things that I think I've done a lot of work. I know I have done a lot of work on it, but it can still continue to improve on, is that ability to, like some things aren't going to go my way. Like, but I don't need to hyper fixate on it. Like once I get the lesson, once I like take the feedback from it of like, hey, maybe I should just watch where I'm going, even if I'm like zoning out, or this stuff happens to everyone. It's okay. Like I'm not any less of a human, or I'm not stupid because of this. Like it just happened. Then I can move on with it a little bit easier.
Well, despite face planting, you're still a handsome guy, so it all worked out.
See, I just had flashbacks because I like wrecked my e-bike over the summer and split my chin open.
I saw that.
And I was like, as long as I please, for the love of God, don't split my chin open again. Like, I'm okay taking any fall.
Yeah.
Like, I'll scrape my hands up.
One mouth is enough. We don't need two.
Yeah, man.
What's your favorite app or resource right now?
App or resource?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm like really trying to use my phone less as a whole. So I would say, like, for the entrepreneurs out there, resource as a whole, the trends community, if you look at by the Daily Hustle and HubSpot, they're fantastic. And then I'll say I really enjoy Colin Samir and their content. If you're familiar with them,
it's a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, YouTube podcast. They cover a lot of like the creator side of things. And as I was embracing the creator side of me and that identity piece, not going all in on it, not making it the only thing that I was, but a piece of who I am, they were very pivotal in helping me honestly gain confidence, but also get the research and kind of behind the scenes look at things that I needed to be successful in that space.
Yeah, they're great. I definitely follow their channel. When were you the happiest?
Is it cliche to say like right now?
No.
Like
it's good.
I think, dude, moving to one of those newer to Austin, moving to Austin at almost 9-10 months ago was one of the best decisions I could have made, because I just feel so grounded, and I almost feel guilty at times because that level of groundedness and rooted in like knowingness of who I am seems to just be increasing by the day here in this community. So I'd say right now I'm excited. I'm excited about the now for the first time in, I couldn't tell you how long, because I think when you start companies, it's very natural to look ahead and get excited about what's to come. Like, am I excited about Seek being a hit and like potentially selling and like cashing out years down the road? Absolutely. Like, yes, I'm happy about that, but I can be happy now in that process too. So I'd say right now.
Do you know Danny Miranda?
The name sounds super familiar.
He's a very big podcaster. He just recently moved here. I think he's done almost 300 episodes now, and I met with him not too long ago. Awesome guy. And he was talking about, he literally just moved here like maybe 3 weeks ago, and how it's such a fun and interesting time to be in Austin and to remember to appreciate the time that we're in right now, because it's not always going to be like that, right? It's just such a unique time to be in this town where there's so many people like you and me and other people who are just excited and inspired and trying things and trailblazing, and just like, it's just such an interesting time to be here. So,
dude, I can't tell you how much I mean, people talk about Austin traffic, give it a bad rap, but like the fact that it took me like 15, 20 minutes to get over here from a quote unquote across town, it's like, forget about it. I will never take that for granted, man. Being from the DC area.
And you lived in LA.
And I lived in LA as well at one point. It's like hour plus.
Yeah.
You don't do in-person podcasts over there.
No.
Or if you do, it's like, that's the thing you do that day.
Yeah, that's the day activity. What's your favorite part about Austin? And you can't say the people because everybody says the people.
It's always the people. Always the people.
I know. That's always everyone's answer. And by the 10th person that told me that, I'm like,
you're like, no,
we can't.
Bad answer. Yeah. Bad answer. I would say just the versatility, like the ability to, I mean, dude, it's 75 degrees and it's January 7th right now, right? 9th. Okay. The fact that it's this early in the year and it's 75 degrees, freaking love that. I love the accessibility of it. I mean, obviously, I went like 6 months without a car here. And you know it well, just having the e-bike life. It's pretty nice. I don't think you can get away with that in a lot of other cities. So I enjoy the versatility. I enjoy the kind of small town feel that it has, but it also is a big enough city that there's a lot of cliques of people that you can kind of go and hang out with and mix and match.
Yeah, it's always been a great thing to know that there's like a million people here, but at the same time, I feel like I still run into the same general people like out on walks or just like going to different events or just like out at the grocery store.
But
just
dude,
small town vibes.
How good does it feel like when you're out? Like I'm training right now for Boston, and like I'm logging a lot of miles, and you just signed up for a marathon too, so running a lot of miles. But isn't it just so uplifting seeing a familiar face when you're out there and you're like you're in the pain cave, like this freaking sucks. My coach has me running what pace now? Like for how long? Counting down the minutes, but. You know, even like our mutual friend Bray, I hit him up the other day. I was like, "Hey man, like I want to catch up." And he goes, "Cool. Like, what are you doing Saturday morning?" I was like, "I got this 9-mile run." He goes, "Cool, I'll join you." And I was like, "You sure?"
Damn.
Like it's 9 miles. He's like, "Yeah, I'll hop in on it." I was like, "That doesn't happen in other places.
No,
people don't willingly just be like, 'Oh yeah, I'll hop in your workout with you." And like it's genuine. Like we caught up. It was great.
That's awesome, man. I love Bray. Yeah, he was just recently on the show. I have one last question, but before I ask that question, I just want to acknowledge you, man.
Thank you.
For just like your genuine heart of service and helping people like get into flow states, specifically like other athletes and other people and other entrepreneurs and business owners and people who just like really want to get the most of their life and do it from a place of gratitude and a place from happiness and a place from like just feeling the flow of life without feeling like it's like forced upon them. And I know you're helping a ton of people because we're both doing so many of the same things from coaching and community building and podcasting. And so I just want to acknowledge like you're doing awesome, man.
Dude, Cory, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say receiving all of that. I appreciate you.
For sure, brother. Before I ask my last question, what's your plug? Where can people find you?
Easiest place I'd say Cory Camp on Instagram. CORY.
Correct.
CAMP.
Yes.
Or Forever Athlete website is just forever-athlete.com. And then Seek coming to the App Store here soon, hopefully.
Yeah, end of the month, right?
End of the month. Well, it'll be a private beta, so it won't be in the App Store just yet.
Got it.
But hit me up on Instagram if you're interested. You're in the Austin area, want to give it a try, and be really on this like ground level of building this new platform together, we'll send you over the beta and we can test out the bugs together.
Dope.
Or in the long run, man.
Last question. So you've been in this business game for 3 years now, you mentioned. If you were to go back to ground zero, or you to talk to anybody else maybe at ground zero, it's really like, what's the best piece of advice you could give to them? Whether it's you or your former self, that just like would help them be moving in the right direction and make sure they're focused on the right thing. What maybe would be the advice you'd give them?
Super tangible here. So what I wish I knew, what I did a little bit more recently as a game changer, is write out all the things that I find myself, one, being called to do, wanting to do, or am doing on like a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. And once I have all of that, I look at this chart and we'll have 4 quadrants. We'll have breaking things down by important versus not important, urgent versus not urgent. Anything that is not urgent and not important gets eliminated from your life and no longer exists. Stop wasting your time on that. Anything that is urgent but not important gets delegated out. So whether that be like, for me, this is all based off of your values, like food. Food is obviously urgent, but it's not necessarily important to me to be making all of my meals. So like Alex Hormozi talks a lot about, like, it's better off once you start making more than $15 an hour, financially speaking, to actually go out to eat and order out a reasonable meal of like $10-ish. You'll get more out of your hour financially by doing that than if you're like, oh, I'm going to like make my lunch from scratch and it takes you an hour.
Right.
Give and take. So eliminate the things that are urgent but not important to you. Then you start to really prioritize the things that are urgent and are important. That's like your day-to-day tasks. Those are more or less like seeing the clients, right? Like if you're selling 10 packs of whatever your services are, like you got to actually see the client. So prioritizing that. And then lastly, this is the thing that I think a lot of people lose sight of, is the things that aren't urgent but are important. Those are your unlocking moves that actually provide you the freedom, so to speak, that you are looking and desperately searching for by getting into entrepreneurship. That's creating the evergreen courses. That's creating something that's writing the books. It's creating the things that live forever, and they aren't necessarily that trading time for money suck, because nothing is worse than escaping the time for money of like your physical therapist or a PT, a trainer at a gym, and you're just like, I can't wait to get out of here. I just am seeing a client for X amount of dollars and I'm feeling capped out. So I'm going to go on my own. And it's a good dopamine hit at first because you're no longer sharing a cut of that with another organization. You're taking it all in. So you're like, okay, cool. It's this false sense of like you're doing better, but you can find yourself in that cycle, trapped in that cycle very quickly if you neglect the things that actually are unlocking long term. So plan those out. The things that are not urgent but are important, plan those out. For me, it was like writing that workbook on a Wednesday. That was my planning day. I planned ahead of time. I protected that time, hold those boundaries. If I could go back and do it again, I would have done that before I even took the jump, because I would have had a lot more clarity on what it is that I was filling my days with, rather than kind of like haphazardly flopping around in the deep end, just enough to like keep my head above water.
Totally. Love that. Super tangible, super helpful for people. Cory, thanks for being on the show, brother.
Thanks for having me, Cory.
Thanks, man. Hey friend, thanks for listening to the show. And if you have any feedback for me about the show or any other guests that you'd want to see in the show, definitely shoot me a message. I love engaging with my audience and figuring out how I can provide the best value possible to the people listening to this show. Before you go, I only have one ask of you, and that would be to check out my 3 Tips Tuesday newsletter. It's 3 marketing tips every Tuesday specifically for the health and fitness entrepreneur to help them attract new leads. If you press the link in the description, it'll take you directly to the archive of all my previous newsletters, and you can decide for yourself if it's something for you. If you end up finding it helpful, you can just sign up for the newsletter and you'll get it in your inbox every Tuesday. Thanks again, and keep hustling, my friends.